I am super excited to introduce our next session, a panel conversation. We are going to be talking about mental health in the community and events industry. We have three formidable community and event experts joining our stage, and they will dive into the behavioral aspects around why we allow ourselves to take a back seat and what we can do to get ourselves back into the driver's seat. I'm going to bring them up one at a time so that they can each truly experience the magic of the CMX emoji chat flood. So first, welcome to our moderator, the co-founder and CEO of COA, Alexa Meyer.
Hey everyone, so excited to be here.
Please also join me in welcoming the founder and event producer of the Biz Mixer, Karlena Waugh. And of course, the founder and director of Fuck Up Nights and field marketing manager at Bevy, Marsha Druker.
Excited to be here.
Welcome, everybody. Take it away.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Beth. I'm so excited to be here today to discuss a very important topic, which is mental health in the events industry. So by way of quick introduction, I'm Alexa. I'm the co-founder and CEO of COA. And what COA is an online gym for mental health. And I founded COA with a mission, and that mission is to help people be as proactive about their mental fitness as we are our physical fitness. And so we offer live, group, therapist-led classes that teach people things like resilience, confidence, communication, and self-awareness, all of this being grounded in community. So working on your mental health feels more like going to your favorite fitness class or yoga class and less like going to a stigmatized clinic. So today we're here to talk about burnout and mental health in the events industry. And according to a study, y'all, we're all feeling pretty burnt out right now. 76% of us in the events industry are experiencing some level of burnout. And the topic of mental health in events industry is very near and dear to my heart. So previously I was head of marketing. I ran a ton of events, from small events to 10 people to huge conferences of thousands of people. And really, as event managers, we are in the business of belonging. And when we're in service of others, we can often let our own mental health take a back seat. And so today we're going to be exploring the themes of why burnout and mental health challenges are so common in the field of event management, and dig into some of the psychology behind what's really driving this. And then we're also going to be talking about, well, what can we do about it? How can we create a better system? How can we take care of ourselves while taking care of others? So I'm so excited to be here with Karlena, who is the founder of the Biz Mixer and an event coordinator on the event experience team at Maple Leaf Sports Entertainment, as well as Marsha, who's a field marketing manager at Bevy. So before we all settle in for the next 30 minutes or so, I'd love for us to start with something that we do at COA, which is our resting emotional heart rate. And that's just one word to describe how we're feeling right now in this moment. So it can be anxious, excited, overwhelmed, hungry, hungover, anything. So I'll start and share that I'm feeling excited for this conversation. And then I'll ask Karlena and Marsha to share the same. And then all of you, would love for you to share in that chat one word to describe how you're feeling. Karlena.
I don't know, the first word that's coming to my head is invigorated, so I'm going to go with that.
Awesome. Marsha, how about you?
I'm going to go with vulnerable. I think we're going to get pretty vulnerable in this conversation, but I'm excited for it.
We are. And I see those words coming through that chat, so just keep sharing how you're feeling. It's a great way to kind of feel connected and grounded with all of us here. So we're going to get started. And so we're going to get started hearing from Karlena and Marsha. So I'm going to start with Karlena. Why did you choose to get into event management, and what about it do you love?
Oh, I think in some ways event management chose me. So when I think about my journey in the industry, my first event was when I was 13 years old. The event coordinator for a wedding unfortunately slipped down the stairs and had to be taken to the hospital. So they thought that a 13-year-old could manage a bridal suite for the day. And that was like my first taste in working in the event world. And, you know, I went into doing biology and really didn't have a plan to be in events. And it just so happened that with every opportunity that I had and every new job I had, events and experiences and building community always seemed to be the cornerstone. So that's kind of how I got into events, and I started my own business, and now I'm working with Maple Leaf Sports Entertainment to do events for them. So I think in every way, my life has always been focused around people, building community, and creating great experiences and memories.
Amazing. Marsha, what about you?
I also fell into community building and event planning and really fell in love with it over the years. The very first event that I planned and put on was actually my first Fuck Up Nights event. I thought, ironically, if this event failed, it would be something to talk about at the next one. But it really took off, and that's really where I found my passion for putting on events and bringing people together. Something that I love about it is just the connections that happen at events, whether it's field marketing events that I put on for Bevy or the Fuck Up Nights events that I host in Toronto. Just seeing people make really valuable connections at the events really keeps me going.
Yeah, there's this really kind of energizing quality of being an event manager where you're seeing things come to life, you're interacting with people. But as we know, it can be really tough on our well-being. And so would love to hear from both of you, like working in the events industry for several years, having several different roles. What is the impact that working in events has had on your well-being? And can you share some examples where you've been driven to prioritize the role at the sacrifice of your own mental health and well-being? And Karlena, we can start with you.
Yeah, I love that you touched on this because as event professionals, we all know it's very high paced. We're really focused on making sure that the client is getting exactly what they want sometimes at all costs necessary. And a lot of the times we take a back seat just because we want to see a project kind of come to life. So my experience with that was really going through burnout. In my last year of university, I had my first panic attack in a McDonald's. And it was just me taking on too much and really wanting to give a lot to my community as a Don is what they would call it in undergrad. So I worked with students in residence, and I was the type of Don that would, go all out for my students. So I really learned a lot about boundaries, and I'd love to say that was the first burnout experience I had and I learned from it. But as we know, with patterns and habits, we kind of continue the same habits if we don't find ways to change those habits. So going into my professional role, working with undergrad students in post-secondary as a professional, I went through a very similar experience where I unfortunately was in the hospital, and they told me that whatever I was doing, I really had to take a good look at what was kind of causing all this stress, and that if I didn't do something about it, it would be something that would be a detriment to my health. So unfortunately, I had to kind of close the door on that part of my career and kind of find a different way to still be involved in events, but in a way where I could create my own boundaries, my own schedule, and can kind of prioritize my own well-being. So that's kind of how I got thrown into entrepreneurship and learned a lot along the way, learned about myself and how to create those boundaries and take care of self first. Definitely still learning with every project and every client that I work with. But I think that whole journey really, helped me decide how I want to show up in the industry, what type of projects I want to work on, the type of people I want to work with, and how I kind of want to create my professional career. So lots of learning, definitely a lot of instances of mental health. It's things that I still kind of work through now, but overall, it's taught me a lot, and it influences the way that I work with teams and clients now.
What drove you to that place where you were like working in the event space earlier on in your career that led to that event where you had a panic attack? What was going on? Where were you? What kind of work were you doing? What do you think led to that point?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing that I think kind of played into that was just a lack of being comfortable delegating. I would say that I was one of those people that felt like I had a superhero cape on, and I was the only one that could do certain tasks. When realistically, when you have a team or you have other people that you can work with, whether it's suppliers, vendors, or other teammates, it's really important for you to not only learn how to delegate, but to trust those other team members to execute. And I think that was something that I was learning as a young professional, that I didn't have to do everything, and that I needed to ask for help. So what was happening was I was suffering silently. Like no one on my team even knew that I was going through this because I was performing, but behind the scenes, I was in shambles from a mental health perspective. So being able to be vulnerable with your team, when there's a project coming up and you feel like, my capacity, I can't manage this, being able to vocalize that and being able to delegate and ask for help was something that I learned through that experience for sure.
Yeah, and we'll talk about some of the fears that kind of get into that: fear of delegation, fear of admitting that you need help, a little bit later. But thank you so much for sharing your story. And Marsha, I know that you had your own personal story and experience with mental health at the beginning of the pandemic, running your own company. So can you tell us a little bit about what happened?
Yeah, absolutely. So just a little bit of background on Fuck Up Nights. I think, probably a few people are wondering what exactly it is. So it's not about swearing or bad words. It's a community and speaker series all about sharing stories of professional failure and lessons learned. I started this community in Toronto in 2017 and have been hosting regular monthly events in the Shopify space. And, with those events, I've built out a really great team and really got to a place where it was pretty templated. But something that we would do for our yearly anniversary events, we would always go really big for them. We'd get a paid venue, have a caterer, have really high profile speakers, and just a lot of really exciting elements to these events. And they were a lot more difficult to plan and a lot more highly involved. And I really found that those types of events were the things that would normally burn me out. I really found my niche in sort of like smaller, more intimate events. But what happened was leading up to when COVID happened, we had our 3-year anniversary event for Fuck Up Nights Toronto set for March 12th, 2020. I don't know if that date rings a bell for anybody, but leading up to it was a really tough time mentally, just organizing this massive event while in the background all this talk of COVID was happening and everything was really uncertain, especially around events. There weren't really official guidelines out yet on how many people you could gather, when you're supposed to cancel an event. And what ended up happening was COVID was declared a global pandemic literally the day before this event was supposed to happen. There were still no guidelines out around, having to cancel an event of that size. And I ended up just making the difficult decision the day before this event to cancel it because it wouldn't have felt like the celebration that we were planning. So the repercussions of that, I lost a ton of personal money that was sort of invested in that event. Money that was paid for catering, for rentals for the space, all the communication that went around it, communicating with all the vendors, all the incredible speakers that we had that night, the sponsors. It was really taxing. I don't think I slept for 2 days going through that experience. And then what followed afterwards is, I think, what a lot of people here in the room could relate to, was just figuring out how to shift your program on the fly to virtual. And with Fuck Up Nights, there was another challenge added with that, and that a lot of our community members and people that would go out to this type of event, they were also small business owners, young professionals who were really negatively impacted by COVID. So figuring out how to still talk about failure in a way that felt sensitive to the times, how to pivot our content. All of that, I think, was super stressful and led to burnout, but ultimately was really rewarding as well.
Wow. Well, just like kudos and congratulations. And I'm sure in the audience, many of you can resonate with both of those stories where you've had that experience of just overwhelm, having to pivot at the last minute, especially with COVID and the ongoing like wave 3, wave 4, whatever we're in now of COVID. So just take a moment to like congratulate yourselves and kudos to all of you for getting through all of this. So long days, long nights, time pressure, pivoting, being super adaptable. It's a lot. And so is there something about the nature of this work that keeps you in it? Is there something about your personalities that really keeps you and pulls you in despite some of the challenges that the role can have? What keeps you going? And Karlena, I'll start with you.
Yeah, I think it's kind of similar to when you speak to moms about childbirth. It's like being able to see that through, and that feeling of, I don't think I've spoken to any moms that said they loved childbirth, but there's that endorphin that you get afterwards that keeps you coming back for some mothers. So I think events are similar to that, where, when you're in it and you're dealing with clients, you're dealing with the pressures, it's kind of make or break, as I saw someone was saying in the chat. There's a lot of stress, but when you get to that day of the event and you see all of that hard work come to fruition, you see the connections, as Marsha mentioned, you see the impact that it's making in the community. I think that's what keeps us coming back for more. I know for myself, I'm really community driven and impact driven. So being able to see an experience, create a memory, create an impact, and make a difference in people's lives is really what keeps me going and makes all of the other things and struggles and stress that is with every event keeps me going, keeps me coming back for more, I guess you could say.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's some inherent reward there. It's like you do something and you see its impact on people. There is like that endorphin hit, almost like an adrenaline hit, which can be maybe addictive in a way. And we'll talk about that a little later. But Marsha, what keeps you going? Why do you stay in it?
Yeah, I think, like Karlena said, it's definitely the connections that are made at the events, seeing the impact that you make on the people that actually benefit from the event. I think it's also a rush. Like on the day of the event, there's so many things that could go wrong. And you kind of go in like raced for that as a community and event professional. But there's also so many things that could go right. And sometimes you're just like, you're blown away by the end of the event, just like things that are unexpected, like unexpected connections, unexpected conversations, exciting opportunities for future events, ideas that you hear from the community. I think all of that keeps me going as well.
So with all of this, there's kind of this like addicted to the rush quality. There's obviously huge empathy quality in event managers. What are some of the common personality traits? Like one thing that I know for me is like I identify as an extrovert. And so working in events is something that like continues to pull me in because I love being around people. And then it can be hard for me to like step away and do self-care stuff because introverted stuff or alone time is harder for me. And so are most event managers extroverts? Do they drive their energy from people? Are they people pleasers? And so that's kind of keeping them in. Is there a need for validation? Like what psychologically is sort of pulling at people, do you guys think?
Well, I definitely don't think it's an extrovert introvert thing. I think myself and Marsha are prime examples of it not being a certain personality. But I think it's like what drives people. So a lot of event planners and producers I know are very purpose driven. They're big visionaries. They tend to be leaders in their own right. And they're just focused on impact and big picture. So I think it's more so the personality traits and not necessarily a personality type. Because I definitely know some people that if it came down to it and a speaker didn't show up, they would by no means go on stage to fill it in. And there's other people like me that would just grab the mic and hop on. So I think a lot of different personality types. But in terms of the traits and things that drive people, I know that a lot of us are solution focused. We're focused on, executing and seeing something through. I think it's just the way that people are as a personality type. Maybe type A's, very structured. Although sometimes I'm chaotic, I'll be honest. I'm not the most organized person from time to time. But I think there's like the things around what drives people. Like what drives people to work in events, I think is the more psychological aspect of it and less of I'm an extrovert, introvert. So yeah, that's what I would say.
Yeah, I'll say that I've definitely noticed the commonality of being type A. I think, I've met all kinds of community professionals, all kinds of event professionals, and there's definitely a mix of personality types, but being type A, being very like detail driven, I think anxiety is something that a lot of us have in common, just like picturing all the worst case scenarios that could happen with an event. I think that actually a lot of the time that actually leads to a really great event because you almost have a plan B for anything that could go wrong. I'll also say that being an introvert, I think, is really helpful in events and especially in community-led events. I'm the perfect example of that. I don't think anybody would expect me to be the person behind leading something like fuck up nights or just doing events in general. I'm definitely a quieter, more reserved person. But when you're leading a community, it's really important to listen to your community and to, co-create your events with them and to bring programming that's going to help them. So I think being introverted could really be a superpower there as well.
Yeah. And when you mentioned like the type A anxiety, it's like your mind is always planning for the worst case scenario. And we know as people and psychologically, when you're always in that constant state of fear where you're like, what could happen? What could go wrong? That takes a toll on your mental health. And in the events industry, we're constantly thinking about that. And so knowing that that's a trait and that's a driver of people that get into this field, what do you think contributes to making self-care so hard for event managers? This is where we're going to get a little bit more vulnerable here, but like, is it feeling like a fear of disappointing people? Is it, feeling uncomfortable, like what I said, being alone versus being around people? Is it an addiction to that rush? Like what makes it hard to just give ourselves the permission to structure in self-care time and step back and unwind while we're taking care of others?
I would say and not to like call shots at our industry, but I think we've created an industry and engagement with our clients and our community that we're always on. We're always there to help. So I think we've kind of created a monster for ourselves in a lot of ways, where people just expect as a community leader, as an event producer or planner, that you're always going to be there because you got their back. And that's kind of the seal that we've kind of put on ourselves. So I think with that, it's creating the right boundaries where, no, you can't text me at midnight. No, I'm not going to be able to always be answering every single DM on the timeline that my community wants me to. But I think as community leaders and professionals, we really have to create those boundaries for ourselves. And I think having worked with a vast majority of people in the industry, whether it's clients or community or suppliers and vendors, I think we've created an environment where there's that expectation. I think maybe now more than ever over the past 18 months, where I think a lot of us have been working from home and there's this expectation of higher productivity because we're at home and we don't have to commute and we can do more and more and more and more. But I think a lot of us are realizing that there is importance of having that boundary and separation between work and life. So maybe it's time for us to restructure what that looks like. But I think that plays into our ability to have that self-care, because there's an expectation for professionals in the industry to have a certain level of accessibility and being available on people's timelines and not really asserting ourselves or advocating for our own mental health. I think that's something that we all have to do. Know what our capacity is, know what we need and how we work, and really being able to communicate that. And dealing with the pushback, because I've definitely been there where someone, maybe they've worked with another professional before and they're used to being able to message people at 11 p.m. or have a quick turnover, or they're used to working with a professional a certain way. So you just got to know what works for you and how you best work in the industry, and being able to advocate for yourself and educate your clients and your community as to how you can best serve.
Yeah, there's a huge need to change the system. Like, we're all event managers here. We're all working in this. Like, how do we change the system from having this like expectation of always being on, no breaks, no permission to just like, I know we talked in our prep, it's like sometimes you forget to eat on event days. You don't feel like you have the permission to just stop for 10, 15 minutes and just like eat a sandwich, eat a banana. Like, there's so much going on. And we also talked about how even on the guest side of things of events, often there's very little breaks and they're being rushed around. And so it's like this burnout is kind of pervasive. And so there's the need kind of externally to change the system. But then also it's like, how can, we take action individually to just start prioritizing our own mental health and setting an example. Marsha, I'm curious to hear, what makes that individual work hard for you while you're working?
Yeah, I think something that really surprises a lot of people about events is just like how small event teams usually are. Like, you'd be shocked, like some of the biggest events that you'd attend, like even CMX Summit, for example, there's a really tiny team behind that. So it's really hard to prioritize yourself sometimes as an event professional, because there's so many things to do to make an event actually happen. And if you're not going to do it, a lot of the time it just doesn't get done because the team is so small. So it's not so much that you feel guilty for taking a break to eat a banana or something. It's just like there's so many things to do. There's so many little tasks, especially on the day of the event or the day leading up to the event. And it's really tough to delegate if you have a really small team. So I think that kind of plays into it as well.
Yeah, there's totally, like, again, back to the system, is like small teams. It's like, how can we on the onset of a project or an event be like, okay, how are we all going to take care of ourselves during this big event push and this event sprint? Can we schedule in self-care time? Can we keep each other accountable to, what works for us? And mental health isn't one size fits all. So someone may need to go take a 15-minute run, or someone may need to just like meditate, or someone may need to just like eat something or cook something or get away from their screen. So I think there's a big opportunity to just make small shifts in the way that we talk about this at the onset of the planning for an event. I mentioned this at the beginning, but we're in the business of belonging. And when we think about belonging psychologically, it's a deep psychological and human need to belong. And so anything we do that is like a perceived threat to our ability to belong can be something that we avoid, right? So sometimes if we're stepping away, we might think that our need to belong is at stake. The other two things that drive people to burnout that we've seen is a fear of not being seen as good at our job. So if we take a break, is our team going to judge us? Are the people at the event going to judge us? And the third piece of it is not being safe in our job. So if we think that like, oh, if I take a break, I might get fired or something like that, and that threatens our sense of financial safety and well-being. And so I'm curious if when we think about belonging, safety, and a need to be seen as good at our jobs, do those fears, like when you think really and reflect deeply, do those fears resonate with you as something that's sort of driving the behavior to sort of overwork and not step back for a few moments to take care of yourself?
Yeah, I think in some ways it does play into it, especially when you're new to a team. I know like I'm experiencing that currently. Thankfully, we're on the positive side of it where I have a very understanding and accommodating team. But that's that initial fear when you enter a new project, especially if you're working with other freelancers or contractors. You don't really have a sense of how everyone works. And it's easy, as you mentioned, for you to feel like, oh, everyone is just working like all day and they're sending emails at midnight and I just need to sleep, or I don't want to work an event until 2 a.m. that day. I'd rather work a morning event. So I think a lot of the time it comes into play when you start that comparison towards your peers, which, as we all know, comparison is like the worst thing. But being someone who has anxiety and whatnot, comparison is a consistent thing that I think we can all relate to. But I think it comes down to comparing our productivity, comparing the way that we work plays into it, and a fear that, to your point, if we don't work or outwork the person that's beside us, then we're not seen as good as our job, and that person is potentially the one that's going to catch the worm or catch the event, or however you want to phrase it. Yeah, I think a lot of it is we compare ourselves to the productivity of our peers and what the expectation might be for that organization. So I know for a lot of us, whether we're working within a company or we're working on a project that's consulting for another business, we kind of want to adapt to how things are done, and we don't really want to shake the boat too much, especially when we're coming into a project and working on something. So I think there's a lot of chameleon type work that goes through where we're kind of adjusting to what works on a team. And there can be that comparison that comes up when we kind of go through that process of fitting in and being able to execute.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can definitely relate to that too. And I think, there's the comparison with your team, but there's also, I guess, like the comparison with yourself. Being a perfectionist running events, you have really high standards, and, you want to make sure that your goals are met with the event as well. With driving field marketing events, I like something that's a lot of pressure with this type of role is just, getting the right people to the events, the metrics that go around the events, making sure that they have business impact. So, making sure that you're hosting a really valuable event, the production is great, but also, keeping an eye on the metrics for the business, that could be a lot of pressure.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that's really helpful here is just even that like awareness, that self-awareness in moments of like, I'm comparing myself to somebody else, so I'm going to like overwork, or somebody emailed me at 2 a.m. So like I have to respond to that email at 2 a.m. Really encourage everyone to just like step back and try to acknowledge like, what is the fear driving the desire to overwork here? Is it a fear of belonging? Is it a fear of like not being seen as good at your job? Is it a fear of like, I might lose my job? And that awareness really helps us kind of ground and be like, there's no actual threat here. I can respond to this email the next day. I can finish my lunch before responding to the email. When we have that awareness, it makes it easier for us to step back, knowing that we aren't actually threatened, and feel okay giving ourselves that permission to take that break and figure out like what we need to continue staying energized in this industry, because it requires a lot from us. And so with this, I'm curious, like, how has your attitudes toward overall event management and self-care and mental health changed over the last 18 months? Are there things that each of you do individually for your mental health that you do differently from what you've done before? If you manage a team, are you doing something differently on your teams to encourage this?
A lot of check-in and being transparent. That's something that I've kind of learned along the way, is the importance of kind of getting a sense of how each person on your team works best, and giving each other that safe psychological space to voice if you feel overwhelmed. It's something that I know we do a lot in our team, is really checking in and validating it to say, hey, we just did a brief. for about an hour. It's a lot of information, I understand. And giving ourselves the ability to say, hey, we don't need this task done right this minute. This is the timeline that we need that on. If you need support, feel free to reach out. Even voicing those things helps people feel less overwhelmed, and that feeling of, I don't have to compare myself, or I don't have to answer an email at 2 a.m. because I've been given that ability to work in a more relaxed way or reach out to help. I know it's something that we do a lot. And as well as just kind of figuring out where people best shine and where they want to work on, like what type of things they want to be involved in, or what their strengths and weaknesses are. I think those are like some huge pieces, is just really having that communication at the onset of a project to get to know what roles people are going to take on, where do they feel like they can best shine, and kind of creating that space where if I have a task list and I feel really overwhelmed today because of, something might be happening in my personal life, or maybe I have to take off to do an appointment or something like that, but feeling like you're on a team where you can voice all of those things, and people are willing to help pull up the slack without that guilt of I let the team down. So I think it really comes down to vocalizing where you're at and creating a space amongst your team where people can feel like they can share if they're struggling, knowing that the people around them will help pick up the slack, or they can delegate to them. So I think those are some huge points, is really just having a space where you can openly express how you're feeling on a day-to-day, doing those emotional check-ins with each other, seeing where people are at and if they need help.
Yeah, like we got to normalize burnout as a risk. Like burnout is the workplace injury of the 21st century, right? It used to be that like we were working in like factories and like physical injuries was a real risk. And that was like something that people watched out for within themselves and with each other. And now it's like normalized, like burnout can happen. Let's be proactive about it and put in place the culture and the structure in order to prevent it. Marsha, what about you? What's changed in your perspective around events and mental health, and what are you doing to take care of yourself?
Yeah, so I would also say like asking for help, delegating when I can. And, I did mention that event teams are usually small, but working for a larger company, there's different people that you could pull in. There's people who might be interested in helping with finding speakers, or maybe watching one of the networking tables at an event, just, looping in more people and having a support system around you to really make your event successful. Something else that I think I've learned kind of the hard way, I think I had an assumption going into doing virtual events that, it doesn't take as much energy, or I'm not going to be as tired after a virtual event like I was after doing fuck up nights in person. That was a huge misconception. And, my first few events at Bevy, I remember I would like finish off my event and then I would go into my regular day of like back-to-back meetings and things that needed to happen. Something that I learned pretty early on with that is just to like block off my calendar for a chunk of time after a virtual event happens, just to give myself some time to breathe, kind of like process how that event went, and just to have the time to do the proper follow-up without rushing into the next thing. That's been really powerful for me.
Yeah, that taking a breather is really important. And so I want to summarize with some action items and ways that all of us in the events industry can take care of ourselves as we continue to work through this really stressful time. And so the one thing that has worked for me is just acknowledging mental health is not one size fits all. So I'm not going to tell all of you to meditate, or I'm not going to tell all of you to exercise, because you have to really figure out what works for you. And so the number one thing is like, get to know yourself first. Like really think about what's driving your desire to overwork, or what's driving the behavior around burnout, what's driving the stress. Really think about that. And then the second piece is, once you have some of that self-awareness, is commit to experimenting with things that work to kind of lower your stress. So that could be, if you're over worrying about what could go wrong, like schedule a worry hour. That's something we talk about a lot. It's like, put it on your calendar, be like, this is my time to worry about
worry. Yes.
I love that.
I love that so
like permeate throughout your whole day with worries, and then it can totally stress you out. It could be, for me, I know because I'm an extrovert, I commit to activities that involve other people that are good for my health. So like one of my friends, she started teaching kids soccer after work, because it's like I have to be accountable to people, but it's something that I like have to show up for that's not work related. Could be group classes, it could be finding an exercise buddy, it could just be simply scheduling time to call a friend or a family member that makes you feel really good. So figuring out the experimentation and what works for you is really important. And so to end off, I want to ask the panelists, what is one thing that you can commit to this week to take care of your mental health?
A pajama day.
Pajama day. Awesome.
Yeah, no, and when Marsha talked about having that time to debrief and unwind from an event, I think it's a really important thing. So often we're so used to doing back-to-back events. Okay, we did the one event, debrief, heading to the next one, but allowing yourself time just to kind of take that exhale. And if that means that, you're working from home today in pajamas, you deserve that. You've earned it. So I think when it comes to managing your stress, I know there was a question about how to lower stress. Just really thinking about what energizes you, what makes you feel the most calm. For some people, that might be dance, it might be hanging out with your partner, your pets, whatever brings you joy, whatever makes you feel energized and rejuvenated. Those are the things that you can focus on to kind of reduce that stress, and making it a part of your schedule where, after every big, large event, I'm going to do that one thing that's going to help me feel happy, that's going to bring me joy, it's going to help me have that exhale moment.
Love that. I might steal your idea for a pajama.
I love that.
What about you?
I think something that really helps me is just doing activities that kind of get me out of my mind and get me into my body. So like incorporating workouts during the week, and especially on event days, it can be so, tempting to just put it off. But, just trying to do a short workout in the morning, just moving my body somehow, maybe going for a walk. I'd love to commit to that.
Amazing. One thing that I'll suggest, which I actually want to do a refresh of, is when we talk about like, how do we create this culture on our teams? One thing that you can do is it's called an emotional fitness survey. So at the beginning of an event or working with a team of people, you send out a questionnaire saying, what makes you feel good? What do you need to take care of your mental health? How would I know when you're having an off day? How do you prefer to receive feedback? And just knowing those preferences of the people on your team. We do this at COA, and we share the results with the entire company. So everybody sees like, oh, this person prefers private feedback versus public feedback. This person kind of likes to spend time alone when they're having a rough day. This person really needs exercise. And just building that shared language and empathy really across the team can be really helpful. So my to-do for this week is to just update my results for the emotional fitness survey, because this week I really need some exercise. And then I'd love to invite the audience to commit in the chat. Think about one thing that you can do this week in the next 7 days for your mental health. And it'll be good because we're kind of crowdsourcing ideas as we think about starting to experiment with what works for us. Yeah, seeing some great ones in there. Okay, so we're going to end where we began, which is with that resting emotional heart rate. So I saw a lot of like stress, anxious, overwhelmed at the beginning, and that's totally normal. That like we're all feeling that. And so let's end where we began with either the same word, or maybe you're feeling and your mood has shifted. One word to describe how you're feeling. My word right now is hungry. I ate a little bit of a breakfast this morning, but I'm going to take some break before my next meeting to eat something. Karlena, what about you?
I'm also very hungry, but I feel warm at the same time. Like, this was a very warming conversation, and just to hear your stories and your insight and the engagement from everyone that's watching right now. So I'm definitely going to get food too. But the conversation has made me feel very warm inside. It might be the light and the fact that I'm wearing this sweater, but I'm gonna chalk it up to the conversation. So yeah.
+1 for hungry. Definitely gonna eat after this. But I would say happy. I'm really glad I had a chance to participate in this panel, and I learned a lot.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much, Karlena and Marsha, for getting vulnerable, sharing your stories, sharing what mental health tips have worked for you as you navigate. And thank you everyone for your attention and participation. Wishing you all a really healthy and warm week. It's cold here in New York, so I'm thinking more warmth.
Thank you everybody so much. This was a fantastic panel. The chat has been super engaged. People are sharing their words. I'll share my word, validated. It's so good to hear people talking about burnout and mental health. And I quoted you, and then other people also quoted you, that burnout is the workplace injury of the 21st century. I feel that, yeah, I feel validated. So thank you all very much. Everybody, please join me in a giant chat emoji flood with your thank you emojis for our wonderful panel.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.